All right, Adrian. Today, let's talk iconic watches. Probably the most iconic sports watches of all time. Nautilus, Royal Oak, Overseas. Which is your favorite? Let's get into it.
Let's do it.
All right, so I think it's only fair if we start with the one that started it all, right? The AP Royal Oak, which was originally released in 1972, designed, of course, by Gerald Genta, overnight, supposedly on a napkin. So I think it's definitely in the conversation, if not the most iconic watch, or sports watch of all time, rather, right? You look at the lineage of the Royal Oak line, right? This one right here is a 15202 ST, released, at least the updated version, the one that we have here, in 2012 to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the 5402, originally designed by Gerald Genta. That design DNA is very much present in that watch, right? You look at a Royal Oak today versus a Royal Oak 40 years ago, it even has the same movement, JLC 920 base, right? It didn't have a quick set date, which they now updated in the 16202s. But that lineage of the Royal Oak, I mean, you said it perfectly, right? It transcends time. It's a timeless design, and it's an aesthetic that I think nobody else has been able to do as successfully.
Yeah, I mean, look, in terms of just how dynamic the watch is. Yeah. So if you look, the first 5402 was a time only. Now fast forward to 2022 here, and within that time frame, what's it been? It's been 50 years, yeah. Right? Essentially, in 50 years, they have literally put every single complication known to man in the Royal Oak case, yeah. Which they haven't done with a Nautilus, and they haven't done with an Overseas.
Yeah.
They have put literally every single complication.
And not to mention everything that has spawned out of the Royal Oak, right? Like a Nautilus, you see the Aquanaut, for example, right? I think that's very clear that you see the kind of design DNA of the Royal Oak, or sorry, of the Nautilus with the Aquanaut, but with the Royal Oak, you see the offshore line, you see the concept line, you see even, for example, the Cody 1159, which has the Royal Oak mid case, right? There is so much that has spawned just from this one release alone. I mean, I can't even imagine what Audemars Piguet today would be if they did not have the Royal Oak. You know?
Yeah, I mean, like when you look at Overseas, you know, just overseas terminology in terms of, you know, sailing and yachting and marine sports overall for watches, it kind of goes hand in hand. I'm not even really sure if that's what Vacheron was going after that, but there are nautical features in a lot of different watches.
Name aside, I think again in terms of the iconicism 100%. Of the line, it doesn't get much better with the Royal Oak, not just because of the Royal Oak model line, but everything that has spawned beyond it. Yep. Right, we've never seen a watch be able to have the impact for a brand that it has had, right? The Daytona has had a significant impact for Rolex. But, I mean, there's so many other watches in the line. Submariner is also iconic. GMT is so iconic. Date, right? You go down the line, there's so many different iconic models from so many different brands. AP, perpetual calendars, world times, annual calendars, even their Calatrava's are very iconic. But when it comes to AP, it does not get more crucial than the Royal Oak. So, in terms of sports watches, I think I'm right there with you. It's probably the most important sports watch design of all time. Let's go to the next one. So next one that was released in 1976, a young man by the name of Gerald Genta also, is assigned by Patek Philippe to create a watch, and he creates the Patek Philippe Nautilus, not unlike what you see here. This is actually the original reference, 3700, except this one is in yellow gold and far rarer because they only made roughly 1,500 of these ever.
I think it depends what your relationship is with the Nautilus over time, right? There's a lot of newcomers into the industry that go for the Nautilus right away because it's the hype thing, because everybody's talking about it. But from a guy like myself that had exposure to watches, you know,
going back over a decade,
Nautiluses were not at the forefront for Patek Philippe. Right? At the time, 5970s were popular, 5070s were popular, 5960s were popular. Patek Philippe was
the king of complications.
Yeah, the king of complications. It was associated with a traditional dressy watch on a leather strap with a complication. Nautilus was not even really in the top of the conversation. There was a very niche market for Nautilus at the time, right? You didn't even really hear. 5711s were under MSRP. Yep. 5980 were the biggest dog at the time.
For years,
at the time. So the difference, I would say, between a Nautilus and Royal Oak, it's not that one is better than the other. I prefer Nautilus because Patek Philippe overall is my favorite brand. So the Nautilus to me is the sporty touch of Patek Philippe. Now Patek Philippe is a very interesting one with the Nautilus because you had a lot of different case sizes. We've seen a lot of different things done with them. Some were more successful than others. But overall today, I think it's probably on top of everybody's list in terms of sports watch that they want. If you line up 10 people in a room and ask them, do you want a Royal Oak or do you want a Nautilus? I think today more people are going to be geared toward wanting the Nautilus because of it's damn near impossible to get.
I think it's also, Patek is probably the most prestigious brand in the industry. I think you get a design that also has 𝗕𝗫𝗬𝗬 roots. It's very much timeless, right? You look at the lineage of a Nautilus. This is a 3700. It doesn't look unlike a 5711. In terms of big name brand equity, it doesn't get better than Patek Philippe 100%. In the watch industry, right? Now, you mentioned something that I'd love to expand on a little bit more, which is Patek was never known for the Nautilus, right? I mean, you saw even at the time of the 5711's release in 2006, I believe it was to commemorate, I think, actually it was the 30th anniversary of the release of the Nautilus, yes. Of the release of the Nautilus back in 1976 by 𝗕𝗫𝗬𝗬𝗬, and it was kind of a flop of sorts. Now, why do you think that is? I have my own theory, but I'd love to hear from you what you think it is.
It's very hard to put into words the exact reason, but in my opinion, seeing the pretty much the word I'm looking for, the popularity increase in the Nautilus, I think personally stemmed from the release of the 5980 in rose gold.
Okay.
When that watch was released, and I believe it was 2013, is what really trailed the rest of the Nautilus line behind it. At the time, it was the first time in a long time where they came out with a full rose gold Nautilus, and they made it with a chrono. And I think it hit the market hard because it was just aesthetically beautiful. Sports watches were coming back to the forefront, and with the release of the 5980R, it really woke up the Nautilus lover again. I think that was the focal point into bringing Nautilus back. Now, a little bit after that, you started hearing Patek's name being brought up in media with rappers and athletes. You started seeing them be more accustomed to it. So what's the next best thing? Just like I said, a Patek Philippe dressy, elegant, complication watch. What's the next best thing to it for a more or less casual wear? Was the Nautilus. You started seeing rappers bust them down. So there was a point around the 2016, 2017 mark where these watches were taken in, unfortunately being obliterated with diamonds, right? But that caught on. And a lot of those pieces that had diamond setting were taken off the market, therefore limiting the supply of the watch. And then with the advent of social media via Instagram mostly, you started seeing a lot of these rappers and a lot of these people with a lot of followers wearing Patek Philippe, and then it just took off from there. That's really all it was. It was exposure to the Nautilus and to the brand.
The whole situation with collectors, mainly Patek Philippe collectors, acclimatizing themselves to realizing, okay, a Patek sports watch is special because X, Y, and Z. And then secondly, the social media hype behind it, right? Now let's take 1 year after the release of the Nautilus is the release of the Vacheron 222, which we actually just saw Vacheron re-release that now this year in yellow gold. This what we have is kind of the modern adaptation, or at least that's the way I think of it, in the Overseas, right? And the Overseas was released, I believe, in 2016, and again, just like the others, really didn't get that much shine, right? At least initially, it was a who cares watch. You know, it just nobody cared. That's just what it was.
It's just what it was.
It just was what it was. But I think in terms of when you talk about luxury sports watches, I don't think it gets much better, at least in the modern day context, than an Overseas. You talk about the flexibility of being able to change the straps on the fly, bracelet, rubber strap, leather strap.
That's one of the things I would say about the Overseas that makes it a little bit more dynamic than your average Royal Oak or Nautilus, is the ability to change out the bracelet with the strap. Now, I will say this, it's very hard to compare the Overseas with the Royal Oak with the Nautilus for obvious reasons. Obviously, there's more demand for the Royal Oak and Nautilus as a whole, although we've seen in recent times Overseas really become the next best thing. However, I will say that they are superior in their dials.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt.
You take an AP blue, you take a blue Nautilus, and you take a blue Overseas. The blue knocks it out of the park. Same goes with the black, and same goes with their lighter color variants. It's a much more elaborate blue. It's a more royal blue.
So you want to hear something interesting? They actually make that in the same factory that they make the 𝗵𝗄𝗄𝗓 Chronomet blue. So it's the same kind of color. When you actually look at it, I mean, I've seen both. It's very much that effect, right? It's that blue pop that you just, it's just mesmerizing. Right?
Matter of fact, it's not even the blue one that I am really focused on the most. Actually, my favorite Overseas, believe it or not, is a black dial dual time.
Wow, really?
Yep.
Why?
because I like the red accents with the dual time. I just think the dual time is a cool function, and I think it just adds a little bit more character to the dial. It's a bit of a hot take, but I've seen it many times over, and I don't really see many black dual times on the market. You see a lot of blue ones, you see white ones, and for whatever reason, I really prefer it. I will say the one thing that I hope that Vacheron Overseas does in the future is taper their bracelet in. If you look at the bracelets, right, with the Royal Oak, from the case all the way down to the buckle, it tapers in. It gets thinner and thinner as it goes down, whereas the Vacheron is pretty much one size. Yeah. So it's like a block, right? So that's one thing that I would like for them to change is that bracelet, because if you get a lot of wrist time with it, which I have before, it's too bulky right here. Again,
we talk about, these are timeless, iconic designs, right? They don't need to be meddled with or changed. No. This is still very recent, right? I mean, we're talking only 4 plus 6 years since it was originally released, right? So I think there's no doubt, I think Vacheron will perfect the design, but they still have some work to do. The current state of the Royal Oak market. We look at the current state of the Nautilus market, current state, unfortunately, of the overseas market, right? 3 very different markets. How do you see these playing out on the secondary market overall?
You can draw a parallel between the Royal Oak market with the overseas market. It's like the overseas, like the Royal Oak's little brother, right? Patek Nautiluses are really unattainable for the masses, right? Right now, in overseas, in a blue dial, in a black dial, and a white dial has become much more affordable. Right. You know, at $60,000 for a stainless steel watch overseas, that's a lot of money. Yeah. At 30 to 35 penny condition, it's a lot more attainable. You're talking about you can get 2 of them for the price of 1 9 months ago.
Yeah, no doubt about it, right? I mean, when you think about a luxury stainless steel sports watch, like a blue overseas that you can only get exclusively from a boutique, you can't exactly walk in and ask for one because you're going to get laughed out the store. You have to establish some kind of purchase history, and it's not just going to be a Vacheron 56 for like 15,000 retail, which even at that point, right, 15,000 retail, the delta that you're paying on the secondary market is literally at par with what you would pay with list, right? Even I would say it's higher to go and get it at list than it would be on the secondary market. So no doubt it's become a very good option, and I'm right there with you, right? In terms of trends, I see it trading the same way that the Royal Oak is trading, right? As the Royal Oak prices have decreased and declined over time, we've seen the same kind of thing with the Vacheron market.
The one thing I will say in regards to the engineering of the overall overseas versus the Royal Oak versus the Nautilus, what is it about this bezel that they did? Is there a term for the type of bezel?
Yeah, it's a Maltese bezel.
Maltese.
It's like the Maltese cross.
The one thing I will say about the bezel that actually is, I would say, superior to the Royal Oak and to the Nautilus is that it's more durable. Yeah. Right? If you dent or you scratch the Royal Oak bezel or Nautilus bezel, you can see it at face value immediately because it's flush, it's polished, there's edges on the Royal Oak, and here there's no edges, but you can immediately see imperfections if there's wear. Yeah. It's very hard to see with the overseas.
And even just in terms of like the guts of it, right? Like a overseas movement versus a Royal Oak versus a Nautilus, there's absolutely no doubt, in my opinion, again, this is just my 2 cents, the overseas finishing of the movement, the quality of construction, it's a little bit better than the other 2, in my opinion.
Again, but your average Royal Oak or Nautilus buyer, that's not the forefront of their attention.
Exactly, of course.
You know? Vacheron, it may be, and that's definitely a great selling point. But again, going back to the Patek Nautilus, you know, people just the average consumer of
it's
that
the Mac
watch,
Daddy sports watch.
You know, the fact that the 5711 got upgraded to the 330 movement with the hacking seconds, that's not even really still a talking point. Right. Even though it's a much better feature on the watch, but you don't really hear people talking about it that much. You know, nobody turns the Nautilus over and goes, "Wow." You know, they'll turn a split second over, and they'll say, "Wow," but they won't do that with the Nautilus or Royal Oak.
So what has been the difference between maybe the market for these 2 versus the Nautilus?
It's a perfect supply-demand formula, right? Because like I said, it is the most in-demand sports watch on the market today. I mean, Daytona aside and GMT aside, that's a completely different topic of conversation. And Nautilus is the most in-demand sports watch that there is. Therefore, they also make a lot less of them for a completely different client. As soon as they're available, they're picked up on the market and they're gone, right? You cannot walk in the store and get one. You have a much better chance of getting it overseas. You have a much better chance of getting a Royal Oak of your choosing than you will Nautilus. And that's the bottom line.
It's part of the allure of the Nautilus, right?
100%.
It's just how difficult it is to get at retail, which is, again, crazy considering, you know, not even a decade ago, you could walk in and basically get one at retail, right? It's just the way it was. What is your favorite? Because, again, these are three very much high horology sports watches. If you could only have one, which would it be?
Although Nautiluses are my favorite and Pateks are my favorite, I'm gonna have to go with some variation of the Royal Oak, just because when I associate Audemars Piguet, I associate with Royal Oak. Because of how dynamic it is, because of how many different variations and dials and complications they made, I'd probably have to go with the Royal Oak. That would be my choice.
That's a fair assessment. Me being a Vacheron lover, I think the choice is pretty obvious. For me, I'm going to take the Overseas. Listen, the Nautilus is a great watch. I'll never forget when I first tried one on. I
feel terrible saying this because Patek is my favorite. It's my favorite brand.
I mean, listen, it's fair, right? You have to, if you have to choose one, you know, you can only have one for life. That's totally fair, right? I mean, listen, there's no bad choices here. There's no wrong choices. If I had to pick one, I agree with you in terms of, you know, the importance of the Royal Oak to the AP brand. There's no denying that. But I like the fact that the Overseas is essentially three watches in one, right? Because you can get it on leather, on a rubber strap, on a metal bracelet. I think the blue dial of the Overseas is objectively nicer than the Royal Oak and the Nautilus. And I think in terms of movement, finishing, in terms of quality of construction, I personally like the Overseas the most. And again, if you had to ask me which one I would have from a model line, I would take the Royal Oak. I'm with you 100%. Because what they've done with the Royal Oak cannot be understated. It's arguably one of the most important watches in the history of watches, and it's the quintessential luxury sports watch.
A Royal Oak is a blank canvas.
Yes.
That's what it is. Again, and we've covered this topic a few times before. Started with the 5402, which was a time only, and then escalated to this point with the first off, Royal Oak perpetual calendar for me, from an aesthetic standpoint, is the most beautiful perpetual calendar. I prefer it to the 5740 Patek. The placement, everything, the eligibility, absolutely beautiful watch. Put a tourbillon cage in there. They have Royal Oak minute repeaters. They have
split-second minute repeater,
they have
perpetual calendar.
Skeletons. You know, we've never seen that with the Nautilus, and I mean, we've seen it with the new Overseas perpetual skeleton. But God, it's so dynamic. It's just a blank canvas, is what a Royal Oak is. Yeah. So kudos to Gerald Genta for making the greatest watch design of all time.
Yeah.
So.
That's our picks, guys. I hope you enjoy this. Let us know down in the comments which one is your favorite. If you had to pick one, again, always interesting to get your feedback in terms of if you had to have just one for life, which would you pick? Guys, be sure to like the video, subscribe for more in the future. As always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.